This is the podcast I think I meant to start back in 2020 when I began my Create the Ripple podcast. It's been a very fun journey to have that part of the show, and I think this is going to be an evolution of the same. The Girlfriend Survival Guide is based around the idea that, girlfriend, whatever you are going through one day, if you can persevere and get through it with some grace, some dignity, and some courage, which I think is what life demands of us, the story of how you became who you are today, the story of how you got through that transition, that trauma, that drama, will become the roadmap for someone else. It's someone else's girlfriend survival guide. I read a quote once: I am who I am, and I'm proud to be who I am because I fought like hell to become her. And I have to tell you, that is exactly how I feel. So I started Create the Ripple podcast because I loved interviewing other people. And I found along the way that I was able to share bits and pieces of my story. This was the time of my life when I was still not quite prepared to show up in integrity, in authenticity, and in fullness of myself. Learning to embrace the fullness of myself really came post the birth of my second child, Jack, when my body became very, very, very full. Fuller hips, fuller boobs, fuller face. And I had to really ask myself and embrace it. There's a movement happening right now where we are choosing to be much more inclusive of other bodies. And to be honest, I'm here for it. Embracing the fullness, my fuller figure, my fuller face, my fuller life, the fullness of myself. Took some time. So in 2020, I was dating a man who I was absolutely ridiculously crazy for. Ladies, let me tell you, tall, dark, handsome. I chose him. And I felt like for the first time in my life, I was in a very healthy place and I could choose to be with him. Funny thing is, he was making choices that proved to me that he was not who I should have been with. I wanted more children. He got a vasectomy. Um, there were other things that I put up with, but I loved this man. Mind, body, heart, soul. I loved him. And when we ended, it was hella hard on both of us. And a lot of my old demons of mental health, suicide ideation, you name it, came up in the healing. But for the first time in my life, I just felt exhausted at continuing to repeat the patterns over and over and over and over and over again. People would say to me, well, that's just what you do. That's just who you are. They would tease me about who I was dating, saying, who's the flavor of the week? What color are the socks you're wearing this week? And I was sick of it, sick and effing tired of it. And so I did some deep work. And to be honest, I knew that that day was coming because when I was 17 years old, I endured a sexual assault from the boy I was dating because I didn't know how to say no when he wanted to go all the way. It was an assault on my person. It was an assault on my mind. Did I say anything weakly? But not in any way that carried any weight. And I had been running from that moment, hiding the hurt and the trauma of that moment, as simple as it was, my entire life. And every other bad decision came largely from that moment. And I want to share this parts of the survival guide with you. When James and I broke up, I felt like I was ripped open. And there was a moment when I realized I had two options. I could lean into the pain and feel it fully, knowing that it was likely going to lead me to healing back all the way to that original pain, or I could continue to ignore it. To be honest, I was terrified to lean into this pain because I was worried it would overtake me and I might actually harm myself. But it didn't. When I leaned into it, it felt like relief. It felt like you do when you lean into a good yoga pose, like a good stretch, deep fascia pulling. It hurts. It can hurt really bad. And when I looked at myself energetically, and I looked into that rip of myself and my soul, I saw stars. When an energetic healer took me into my heart through a sort of hypnosis process, I discovered that there were parts of myself that I didn't even know. There was more capacity for love. There's more capacity for being, for doing, for trying, for feeling, for tasting, for touching, for love. Being ripped open was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I turned fully into the pain that I had been running from for 20 years. And I engaged therapists, psychologists, acupuncturists, massage therapists, healers, and a feminine balance coach who helped me realize that we all have a part of ourselves. It's masculine and feminine, right? And I had been leaning much more fully into my masculine for a very long time. The masculine's the protective part of you, right? Your strength, you're strong. And it was high time that I lean more fully and presently into my feminine, the receptive, the receiving. And I spent about 14 weeks being pretty much totally useless for anything except for crying, grieving, healing, being. And then I began to emerge, having met myself for maybe the first time and no clear idea how to function in any of my current roles. And so I said goodbye to friends. I said goodbye to jobs, opportunities, business partnerships, you name it. I lit a match and symbolically watched bridges burn. I burned it down till there was nothing left. And in all of that, found more relief and peace than I can possibly tell you. And so this podcast is going to be me being honest with you. I do have plans to have a couple of co-hosts who are also women who are embracing their messy, their grief, their healing. And the goal here is to be much more gossipy, much more real, much more raw, much less professional. But in some small way, hopefully, give you an honest, truthful, authentic roadmap that you might be able to follow. So when I was healing from trauma, or in this case, breaking up from boyfriends, I would usually watch Sex and the City. And by the time I got through season 8, I had laughed and cried and watched enough drama that I felt like I was back to myself again and I could function and breathe. I guess I kind of want this to be your Sex and the City. I want you to come with me. I want you to shake your head when I tell you about stupid decisions I made. I want you to laugh with me when I tell you about stupid decisions I made. I want you to cry with me when I tell you about my grief. I want you to hear yourself in the stories. I want you to feel free to let me know that you have a similar story. I'd love for you to be my co-host if you feel like you have one. And I want us to get real, ladies. Because you know what? Enough is enough. And I know you're a survivor too. You haven't gotten this far without having some kind of drama or trauma that you've had to choose powerfully to live through. And it has shaped you. I know it has. I have been changed by the decisions I made, the repercussions they brought on, the people who have hurt me and wounded me, and the people that I have hurt too. I'm in the process of writing a book, and this book will go very much hand in hand with this podcast. As I said, I think this was the podcast I meant to start back in 2020, but it took me this long to come to the place where I was able and willing and ready to share the fullness of myself with you and invite you on this very wandering, messy survival guide. Thanks for listening.